Okay, so I think we can start. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Yotam, and I'm one of the organizers of Hope for Israel Alliance. Um, Hope for Israel Alliance is a grassroots movement, a Zionist organization, and our focus is combating anti-Semitism, supporting Israel, and raising awareness for the hostages. Today's webinar today will focus on anti-Semitism in academia, and we have three guests. Einav Tsach from the University of Maryland. He's the president of UMD Mishelanu, the Israeli American Student Association, majoring in multi-platform journalism and business and minoring in Jewish studies. Thank you for joining us. Professor Milette Shamir, professor of American Studies, serving as vice president of Tel Aviv University. Professor Shamir researches American literature and culture in the 19th century, and she's the co-founder of the American Studies program at Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining us. And Ambassador Emmanuel Nahshon, lead combating academic boycott on behalf of the Israeli universities and former Israeli ambassador in Belgium and Luxembourg, served as deputy speaker of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and serves as the Ministry Deputy's Director General for Public Diplomacy. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for Tali and Sharon co-hosting and organizing this webinar. And let's start. So, Einav, can you please tell us briefly about your experience as a student in the American academia, and especially focusing on the rise last year in anti-Israel and anti-Semitism across campuses, and
Sure.
how does it affect you as a student?
Sure. First of all, thank you all so much for being here and for organizing. I think it means a lot to me as a student to see not just other students feeling like they have a stake in the situation, but also adults and professionals. So it means a lot. The past year, if I'm being entirely honest, was a bit of a blur. I've gone through, and I think we as a community have gone through so many new experiences that we never thought we would need to handle. I think that the best way for me to describe what we went through is just shock after shock. I think I'm Israeli. I was born in Israel and I moved to the US when I was 8. And after October 7th, I remember thinking how crazy it was that immediately the way people were treating me as an Israeli shifted immediately. So whether that means people kind of talking to me less, giving me dirty looks, slowly kind of pushing me out of certain spaces, that was common. And we kind of, that was a common theme among a lot of Jewish students. And I remember starting to kind of, as a community, responding to October 7th and organizing different events and asking students how they were feeling. And I was amazed by how identical the situation was for everyone. Everyone was describing a sense of panic, of hysteria, of a feeling like they did not understand what was happening around them and how it could be happening. And everyone felt kind of attacked. And I think that's kind of how it affects Jewish students, a real sense of vulnerability. If there's one optimistic side is I think a lot of people, myself included, found some renewed and rejuvenated pride in being Jewish and our connection to Israel. We saw a lot of people, myself included, starting to wear Magen David necklaces and the hostage tags and speaking out in very public ways, which I think is something that gave us all kind of strength through this period.
Can you please describe, for example, many specific event or something that happened to you or anybody you know on campus?
Yeah, there were a lot of different things. I would say 2 examples come to mind immediately. In November, actually at Students for Justice in Palestine demonstration that happened to be on the anniversary of Kristallnacht. There was a chalking that chalking was a common theme. People would use chalk to write messages, frequently anti-Semitic. And at that protest, one person chalked the phrase Holocaust 2.0 on the ground. And that was something that people were extremely shocked by. So I think that's one event that was very traumatizing for people. Another event that happened is actually around April, March of this year, a push to introduce it was called a divestment bill, but it was really a bill that promotes the BDS movement, a bill that came up on our student government. And we as a community spent 2 months responding to it by attending student government meetings, speaking out about our Jewish identities, our connection to Israel, why we felt that this bill was targeting us and was in fact anti-Semitic. And we were met by people who made counter speech that, for example, justified the taking of the hostages and said that we aren't as human as we describe ourselves, and just awful, awful things. Those were, I think, the big parts, but it was just a series of events that were dehumanizing and targeting to Jews.
Okay. Thank you for that, Einav. Milette, I can refer the question to you. That's a forward. As we can see, there's a lot of, as Einav described, for example, there's a lot of anti-Semitism on campuses around the world. And as we know, academic research is not in a bubble, and we are sure that affects academia in Israel. So if you could describe for us how all these anti-Semitism affects Israeli academia, and especially, for example, with relationship with international research groups or international collaborations.
Okay, with pleasure. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you all this evening. I think that, I will put it this way. My job at the university at the moment, other than being an American Studies professor, is vice president in charge of academic collaborations internationally. So in my office, we handle all the agreements with universities abroad, joint research projects, joint programs, exchange student programs, international students who are coming here, Israelis who are going abroad. And I think that as soon as October 8th, it was very clear to my team and to myself that we are headed for a very turbulent period in that respect as well, along with everything else that's been going on with this, in Israel. And sure enough, the week after October 7th, you've all seen this already. We began to have reports of petitions that are circulating in campuses around the US and some places in Europe, basically blaming the victims of October 7th and beginning to sound this rhetoric that we've become familiar with, which is anti-Israeli, but also clearly anti-Semitic in the way in which it completely rules out the right of Israel to exist. But I think the real drama began for us, as it has, I suppose, for many of you, around March or April, when the encampments began to grow in campuses around the US, and then they spread also to Europe and other places in the world. I have to say that our first thoughts were with our, Israeli and Jewish students like Einav, who are stuck in that situation on these campuses, our Jewish and Israeli colleagues. We began to hear reports of some of our colleagues who are beginning to feel like they can't come to campus, or their classes are being boycotted, or they're disinvited from events, and that was very worrying for us. But soon we began to understand that the effects on Israeli academia go much more deeply than that, in the sense that we began to experience something that can only be described as an avalanche of academic boycotts that picked up momentum in April and has been going strong ever since. And it's not limited to the US. Maybe I can kind of sketch a map for you very, very briefly. Some of the academic boycotts that we've been dealing with in recent months are in Europe, in Spain, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in other places, in Ireland. But there, the academic boycotts on Israeli universities takes a very specific form. These are mostly institutional boycotts. An institution, a university decides that it's going to boycott Israeli academia. Or in one case, an entire country, Spain, decides en masse, all the universities decide together that they're going to boycott Israeli academia. And this is very worrying for us because it affects a lot of our research grants, a lot of our exchange programs, but it is also manageable in the sense that if the discussion is between institutions, there are methods that you can take in order to try to resolve the problem. For example, you can resort to legal means. And if a university discontinues an agreement with you, you can use legal language and legal mechanisms in order to try to resolve that. What we're seeing in the US, by contrast, are not institutional boycotts at all. There hasn't been almost a single university to date, certainly no important university, that made an institutional decision to boycott Israeli academia. What we're seeing instead are a huge number, hundreds and hundreds of cases where it is the decision of individual faculty members or researchers to either explicitly or implicitly boycott their Israeli colleagues. This can take the form of canceling their participation in a research group that Israelis are participating in. It can take the form of not accepting an article for publication. It can take the form of disinviting Israeli colleagues to conferences in the States. It takes all kinds of shapes and forms. And because these are typically individual decisions, we have very little to do by way of battling against that, because it is the right of every researcher or university professor to decide whether or not they want to collaborate with Israelis. And what we're trying to figure out now, and perhaps Emmanuel and Nahshon will talk about that a little bit later, is how do we deal with this much, much wider, but much more slippery phenomenon of individual rather than institutional boycotts.
So taking this question a step further, in practice, how much do you think Israeli academia represents Israel, both in the eyes of the Israeli academia and in academia in general from around the world?
Well, I think it has been the problem. You know, BDS has existed for a long time. In my field is American Studies. My own professional organization, the Association of American Studies, has been boycotting Israeli academia for the past 10 years. So it's not a new phenomenon. What is new is, I think, is the kind of arguments that we're seeing very, very frequently now that says that Israeli academia should not be boycotted simply because this is a form of pressure on Israel to stop the war or bring about a ceasefire or whatever, but Israeli academia should be boycotted because they're implicated in genocide and in apartheid. And that's a new argument. It's a very, very, sometimes it takes the form of write out lies and, you know, things that I would call almost blood libels. For example, at Rutgers, the arguments against continuing our partnership with Tel Aviv University is that, and this has been circulating in the Rutgers newspaper, and it's been put on a huge sign in the middle of campus. The argument is that Tel Aviv University is holding the bodies of 78 Palestinians and refusing to release them. This is a blood libel, right? It reminds us exactly of the kind of stories that we've been hearing in medieval Europe about, you know, Jews and their love for blood. It's of course completely false. I don't have to tell this group, but it shows the new approach of the boycott movements that doesn't settle for saying academic boycott is a form of pressure on Israel, but says actually academia in Israel is directly involved and responsible for genocide and for apartheid. And this is an argument that we're trying in all kinds of ways to answer and counter with what success, time will tell.
And do you see these effects in specific research areas more than others? For example, one would guess that science would less be impacted than the humanities, but I would guess all research areas would be affected. But do you still see that some areas are more affected than others?
Well, it used to be that the humanities and the social sciences were the ones primarily affected. But in this, this avalanche, as I've been describing it, this is no longer the case. Although it is still more prevalent in the soft sciences, we're seeing boycotts in life sciences, in faculties of medicine, in the exact sciences, computer science and engineering. So at Tel Aviv University, we actually polled our faculty to see how many of them have been affected by boycotts already. And we've received, this was about a month and a half ago, I imagine there are a lot more now, but we received around 130 responses. And humanities and social sciences were the leading areas where faculty have suffered from boycotts, but third was medicine. So it's no longer contained within the kind of more woke, kind of left-leaning disciplines where traditionally we've seen this action, even though a lot of the faculty, I think, who are leading these boycotts on their campuses do come from these areas, but it's certainly not limited to them.
Okay, thank you, Milette. Now, Emmanuel, maybe you can describe, in your opinion, some strategies, both in the short term and the long term, what can be done both by students and by professors and by organizations to combat this rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli academia.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. This is really important, but I'd like to start, with your permission, with a short introduction, because we need to understand also, we need to have some perspective on the phenomenon and the way to cope and deal with it. First of all, it may have taken us by surprise, but at the end of the day, it's a phenomenon which has been with us for many years, certainly since the Durban conference in 2001. The BDS movement, which may have started as a way of exerting some pressure on Israel to come back to the negotiating table with the Palestinians, has turned and changed into something totally different. BDS now has one purpose. It's the destruction of the state of Israel. When you look at those people speaking on behalf of BDS, it is quite clear that in their opinion, there is no place for the state of Israel, and this state is absolutely illegitimate. And the fact that on October 8th, one day after October 7th, they were ready to demonstrate and to organize things with slogans and with everything ready, just shows you how well prepared they were for an event of that nature. And it shows you that this is exactly the nature of this movement. It is, in my opinion, an alliance. It's an alliance between progressive or extreme leftists, or call them whatever you want, and Islamists. And it is a danger, by the way, to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people, but also beyond that, in my opinion, it is a danger to Western civilization and to Western democracy. And you see already the beginning of that in the United States and in other places. This is really a very dangerous movement. A couple of words about my role. So I'm a former diplomat. I had a long career at the foreign ministry, which ended a few months ago. And I was asked by the Association of Presidents of the Israeli Universities to take upon myself the role of coordinating our struggle or our combat against academic boycott. And this is what I've been doing in the last couple of months. The idea is to work together. And in order to do that, we need, first of all, to create a kind of a common database and speak the same language. And this is what I'm trying to do now with all Israeli universities, to make sure that the relevant information is shared by all universities in order to build a database, in order to understand exactly what is the extent of the phenomenon. As you were asking earlier, and it's a very good question, is it limited to humanities, or is it already in the STEM, in the science side of academia? And indeed, it is already there. So to understand also which are the universities in which the phenomenon is more prevalent, and in order to focus our efforts in the best possible way. So this is one aspect of it. The other aspect is indeed to elaborate a strategy which will enable us to counter the phenomenon. I'll start by saying that this is something that we cannot do alone. We need to build coalitions. We need friends. And we have a lot of friends. We have probably much more friends than we think we do. A lot of people understand how dangerous this movement is, and they refuse it, and they do not accept the logic which is behind it. So we need to create those coalitions to make sure that even if people don't necessarily want to be on the front line, even if they don't want to be particularly active, even if they don't want their names to be known as combating BDS, but at least they can contribute their part by helping us. So we need to build those coalitions, and we work, I would say, there are three levels, or three main levels of thrusts of activity. The first, which was mentioned by Milette, is the legal aspect, because it's extremely important to understand that in most Western democracies, boycotting and discriminating is illegal. And we have to grasp those instruments and to understand exactly to what extent they can be used. Now, it doesn't mean that we will take universities to court, but at least we will make those universities aware that their activities are illegal. So this is one important aspect. The second important aspect is the political activity. At the end of the day, we need to apply pressure on universities. And applying pressure on universities, on those universities, of course, who act in such a way. And applying pressure passes through local lawmakers, federal lawmakers in the case of the United States, donors, people who exert an influence over the university, alumni, professors, etc. So, and the more we apply pressure, the more the universities understand that if they are really engaged in this path of BDS, that they are doing something which is wrong, which is illegal, and which is not accepted by a majority of people, the easier it will be for us to cope with the phenomenon. And the last aspect is the aspect of public diplomacy and media. We need to communicate. We cannot have an effective campaign without communication. We need to communicate our arguments and also to counter effectively the arguments of the other side. So on the one hand, as Milette was giving this example of the University of Tel Aviv holding bodies of Palestinians or whatever, so we need to disprove it, and this has to be demonstrated publicly. And on the other hand, it's important also to stress to the world the contribution, the immense contribution of the Israeli academia to humanity. Israeli academia, and we are a relatively small country, but we are doing marvels for humanity in a variety of issues and aspects, and this has to be known in order to have people understand that whatever they are told about Israeli universities is simply not true. Okay, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. And so when you describe explaining and telling people about Israeli academia, it's called hasbara, who do you think should be the main focus of that? Do you think the students, the protesting, people who are sitting on the fence, the academia, the universities themselves? Who do you think should be the focus of all this hasbara, as we call it?
Okay, well, it's a good question because when I look at the students, and again I look at it a little bit because I'm not a member of the academic world, or I'm not part of the academic world. But when I look at the students, I see that most of them are simply not informed. They say things, they repeat things, because they want to be part of a movement, because they think that it's interesting, because they think that it will make them, part of something. But they don't know anything. I mean, we have seen those, when you ask them from the river to the sea, which river and which sea, they have no idea. So they just repeat and parrot things. On the other hand, they are not the problem. The problem are the people behind them. The real problem are the activists who manipulate and use those students and faculty in this fight against the state of Israel. I would put the effort as much as it is possible on the students, of course, in order to show them the reality, but mostly on the professors and on young faculty, because they are behind. They are the people, they are the people giving the information to the students. And I think that this is the important thing. As much as possible, I would invite them to Israel. I would show them the real Israel, because they have no idea. They say things, they repeat slogans without understanding exactly what it is that they are saying. So those are the people probably on which I would focus this hasbara. Now, this hasbara, it doesn't have to come from Israel. It doesn't have to come from Israeli academia. It can come also from other sources, but it has to show the reality of Israel. If people speak of apartheid, and as you very well know, in Israeli universities, you have an average of 20% of non-Jewish students, most of them Israeli Arabs, then this is something which needs to be told and which needs to be shown. And that's probably the best way in order to combat those lies.
So the follow-up question to that is, in some sense, do facts really matter when explaining and providing all this information? And is it an effective way? Because as you've mentioned, most of their arguments aren't factually based. They're in some sense emotionally based. So is it effective to present data?
No, look, there is, because it's a very delicate, all of this is extremely delicate, because at the end of the day, we don't want to limit also the freedom of expression of students or faculty, whether it's in the United States or in any other place. So people are free to express themselves. And when it expresses also political criticism, this is, at the end of the day, this is also legitimate. If they are not happy, or if they want to express their distress or their feelings towards this or that aspect of the Israeli government's policies, that's perfectly legitimate. By the way, you see exactly the same phenomenon in Israel itself. Okay, people demonstrate in Israel against the Israeli government. But there is a fine line which should not be crossed. And in my view, the line is very simple. Do not challenge the right of existence of the state of Israel. If you portray Israel as illegitimate, then you have crossed a certain line. And this is a place in which we will not accept any dialogue with you.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. And circling back to Milette, practically, how can the Israeli academia support and help Jewish and Israeli students and professors from around the world on this topic?
Well, I think that one of the main ways in which we would like to offer collaboration with Israelis who are living abroad is around students and student experiences. I am a very firm believer that one of the best solutions now for the conundrum that we found ourselves in is to have people come here. Like Emmanuel said, we have to bring people to Israel. Of course, it's not that easy at the moment. There are travel advisories. We understand their limitations, but hopefully in the next few weeks, we will reach a place where it's safer to be here. And at that point, focusing for the moment on students, I think Israeli universities need to make a huge effort to bring here as many Jewish students as we can. I think that these students, first of all, some of them, not all of them, I think only 5 to 10% of students are actually in campuses where the encampments are very strong, but these are the elite institutions, and these are the students who are suffering the most. I think we need to bring these students here, first of all, to have them have an experience of feeling at home with us and at home on our campuses and with Israelis. I think that can be a kind of a relief from the protests that I'm sure will be coming back in the fall. But secondly, I think that even Israeli Americans, but certainly a lot of Jewish Americans, need to get a lot of facts right. And I think that they can do it by spending time in Israel, where they see with their own eyes the geopolitical realities, where they're given the facts through our experts and through our teachers and professors, and they in that way become armed with knowledge, so that when they do go back to their campuses, they know how to answer back. They will have the facts on their side. And I think also that, I'm the mother of 2 sons, one of whom is in the army now, and the other has been serving on reserve on and off this entire year. I, like everybody else in Israel, made fun of Gen Zs and, how self-absorbed they are and how much, they only care for TikTok. And like everybody else, I learned some astounding things about this generation of young people, of our students. Tel Aviv University's had almost 8,000 students by now serving on reserves since October 7th. I think that American students coming here and associating with their Israeli peers can also teach them something about resilience, which I think is a very, very important lesson for everyone around the world at the point at which we're at. And I think the Israelis have a lot to learn from the Americans as well. So I'm a very, very strong supporter of making now a national effort to make sure that as many young people come to Israel, Jewish young people and primarily, and spend significant time here, whether they come for a semester or for a summer, or to get a full degree here, or to continue for a graduate degree here. I think we really need to make an effort here.
And okay. And are there any explicit programs, for example, or supports organizations from Israeli academia for these Jewish and Israeli students around the world? For example, you mentioned a legal aspect of it. Are there any legal programs that can help students who have suffered anti-Semitism from the Israeli academia? Are there any support groups or something like that from the Israeli academia?
I don't think that there's any university that provides legal support, and I'm not sure that this is exactly what we would do best for students in the States. I think that there are organizations in the US who do that, like the ADL and other organizations. I think where we provide the best service, again, is in providing expertise and providing firsthand experience of what's going on here, and an ability to network with Israelis and create connections that will hopefully last a lifetime. I think that this is where our strengths are, and there are a lot of opportunities now. I'm speaking from the perspective of Tel Aviv University, but there are 9 research universities in Israel. All of them, after October 7th, have created new programs, new scholarships, new opportunities for students to come here. And again, it hasn't been easy, because it hasn't been easy to come to Israel. It's certainly not easy at the moment, but we're very much hoping that in the next few months, we can help anyone who wants to come, even if they don't have a lot of money to spend on making this trip and staying in Israel, which, as we all know, is very expensive, find a way for them to do so.
Okay, thank you, Milette. Now circling back to Einav, First of all, what is your response as a student, as a Jewish student in America? And second of all, can you please tell us of some organizations that are out there and what are they doing and how can they help students on campus?
Sure. So I think there's a few things. I think the first thing is I agree wholly with Milette in the sense that I think we all have to realize that it's a harsh statement, but I think we've all been a little asleep at the wheel for a long time. And I think we all need to realize that this is the moment that we all step up and that we all have a part to play. And I think that the best way to do that, like Milette said, is to educate ourselves and understand how we respond when those situations come up. I think that's the most effective thing. In terms of organizations, there are so many organizations, there are countless organizations. I've had personally work with the ADL. My Hillel has probably become my second home on campus. I spend a lot of time there. There's the Israeli American Council, there's the Israel on Campus Coalition, and all these organizations are doing extremely important work. And I think the most important work and the most useful work comes through the approach of understanding that the best way to handle these things is to let the students lead. And what I mean by that is the students on each campus have been through the thick of everything, and they understand the dynamics. They understand what kind of administration they have to deal with. They understand student government. They understand their supporters. They understand their detractors. And they understand how to navigate the specific waters of their campus. The most useful work I've been able to accomplish was the work that where these outside organizations came in and said, we're going to help you. We're going to use our resources to help you in whatever it is you're leading, whether that is during the 2 months we had to spend on fighting BDS, an organization coming in and saying, we have a bunch of speeches. We can help you write speeches. We can help you understand talking points. We can help you get food to people to encourage them to come. That's an example. So again, the approach needs to be an organization leveraging its resources. And by the way, one other thing is, if we're talking about media and connections and stuff like that, these organizations have these lanes that they can help students get to, or we might not necessarily understand how to leverage. So if there's a big organization coming in and saying, okay, you're going to do this event, we're going to get you press. We're going to contact reporters that we work with, and they're going to come and they're going to cover it. That's a good way to create more attention, to pressure the university more, and to encourage more people to participate because they see cameras and it becomes a big thing. So the most important help is the help that lets the students lead and support with the resources that the organizations have.
And as Emmanuel mentioned, there's a goal to also have some coalitions with non-Jewish and non-Israeli organizations. Are there any examples of non-Jewish, non-Israelis organizations that you've worked with in the past that have supported? And
so it's a challenge. I think that the current landscape, especially on college campuses, with the kind of the age of people that we're dealing with, a lot of people just don't want to get into it. They'd rather live their lives. It makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to do it. That being said, there are several groups that become allies and that have either reached out to us or we've reached out to them and we found support. I think one good example is during kind of everything that we had to go through last year with navigating BDS, we formed a really good coalition with a new chapter of Christians United for Israel that formed on our campus. We kind of were able to pool our resources and bring each other's knowledge, and I think that was a really heartwarming moment. I think it's hard. It's something that we're still working on. It's something that we're designating as a higher priority this year because we understand that if we present a more united front and a more like saying that it's not only this specific very small community that's demanding this thing, it's a broader community, then we have more power that way. So we're doing our best.
And how much politics is involved? For example, if you're working with all these non-Jewish organizations, there's probably some political affiliation that they have. So how does that affect, for example, working with non-Jewish, non-Israeli groups?
I think that's definitely true. From my own experience, I would say that because the specific issue that we were responding to was BDS, we were able to really focus on the things that bring us together. We were able to share together in the sense that we believe Israel has a right to exist and we want Israel to thrive, and we understand the connection of the Jewish people to Israel, and a lot of other things. That's not the only stuff, but I think it's understanding and leading into the situation of collaboration with a focus on what are we united in, what are we strong at, how are we advocating for those specific things. It's a hard task, but I think that by kind of putting it at the forefront that we're doing this together to lead our shared goals, I think that's how you do it.
Okay, and now that the semester is starting in a week or 2 weeks, depending on the university, as a student, what would be your advice to new or old, or existing students in different universities, and what do you think?
Right, so I have a lot to say, so if I go on too long, please let me know. There's a few key points. The most important thing that we as students can do is form relationships, whether that is relationships with professors, faculty, donors, alumni, lawmakers, local lawmakers, national legislators, literally anyone that will listen to you. And how do you do that? You send an email, you cold email people. I've done that a lot of times this year, and I've been surprised at how effective it's been and how people will actually respond to you. Normally they actually do. The most important relationship that you as a Jewish and pro-Israel student leader can form is that with your university administration. You need to be able to create a sense of dialogue and conversation with them so that they can hear directly from you about the issues that you're facing and how they can help you. And when you're creating those relationships, give them empathy. You don't need to, I think we've seen that coming into any situations very aggressively and kind of lecturing anyone about how they fail to protect Jewish students very harshly, it's not productive. You need to give them empathy, recognize that they also are in a tough situation, and that understand that they most of the time genuinely just want to help you and help them move past things. So lead that with empathy. When you're engaging in conversations with university officials, it's really, really important to focus your goals into very actionable ones. So from our experience, we really didn't get anywhere when we demanded things like huge public statements and like landmark policy change that would have, made, anti-Israel rhetoric not allowed on campus. That's not going to work. So focus your goals on things that they can achieve. Maybe you want them to react to a specific saying that happened at a protest. Maybe you want to start a sense of dialogue, make things actionable. The other thing I'll say is that it's really, really important to organize the community. Take any existing infrastructure of communication for the Jewish community, for the pro-Israel community, and expand it. For us, we had a group chat that we formed right after October 7th. We called it Israel Together. And we ended up having hundreds of people there. And that group chat was the only reason that we were able to mobilize the community to support our efforts against BDS, and we beat it. But we would not have been able to do that had we not had that infrastructure. The last thing I'll say very quickly is that you need to stop relying on any mechanism that the university has for tracking certain situations. You need to be able to start collecting, aggregating descriptions of things that have happened on your campus so that you can be the one to independently say, this is how many times this has happened. This is something that we've seen before. You didn't react. We need you to react now because it's happening. That's how you prove the situation to them and demand change. Those are the cliff notes. There's a lot more to say, but I think that's the important point.
Okay, thank you, Einav. We will now turn to some Q&A questions that we have. So first one is from Estelle. So Milette, I see you would like to answer this question. Could there be one contact person in Israel who could help American students who want to come to Israel to any of the programs you mentioned?
Yeah, so I was just going to type in the website, but I don't know why I can't seem to do that. But there is a website that the Council of Higher Education here in Israel has put out. It's called Study in Israel. I think it's studyisrael.org.il, something like that. And it gives a very, very good, comprehensive, panoramic view of all the programs that are available for non-Israelis to come to Israel for, whether they're degree programs or short-term programs. There's tons of information there, and it's a very good place to start. You can just search the kind of program that you'd like to go to and find all the options in the different universities. And I really recommend that you look into that. But the other thing is, we don't have that many universities. It's not like the US. Just go into the websites of the international schools at each of the big universities. You'll find more information there, and a lot of people very willing to help and engage with you and tell you more and invite you to webinars and invite you to information sessions. As I said, this is like a joint program for all of us at Israeli universities now to try to make this happen for next year.
Thank you. Emmanuel, any advice as to how Israeli faculty in the US can address real concerns about Israeli policies that feed into anti-Israel narratives? Gilad asks.
I'm not sure that I understood the question.
I'll repeat it. Any advice to how Israeli faculty in the US can address real concerns about Israeli policies that fed into anti-Israel narratives?
Okay, well, look, this is something that I was mentioning earlier on. If it's perfectly legitimate to criticize Israeli policies, and if there is any concern regarding this or that Israeli policy, what I would advise is really to talk about it and to share it, because there may be very good answers given the situation in which we are currently in Israel. Things are so precarious and complex, but I would encourage anyway, and I think this is really a fundamental rule, I would encourage anyone to start asking questions. I'll be very happy to give answers to the best of my capacity. I'm sure that other people also in our universities and elsewhere will be very happy to hold those discussions. Eventually, our diplomatic representatives in the United States, and it's perfectly normal and perfectly legitimate. Again, we see, and this is also something which needs to be mentioned, among the anti-Israel crowd, we will see, unfortunately, also American Jews, young Jews. Now, I would love being able to have a dialogue with those people and convince them that they are wrong in their perspectives and wrong in the conclusions. But again, the key is to talk, to have conversations, to have a dialogue, and not give up.
Thank you. Einav, Mayan asks, how did you decide which Jewish student organizations to join / lead on campus, and how do you unite all of them together?
So it's a really good question. I think I don't have an exact answer. What I can do is share what, in my personal experience, worked. So basically, after October 7th, Hillel became the place where we all just kind of flocked to, and everyone did whatever they could. And I think in that moment, it was a lot about whoever wanted to take part in something just took part in it and just did their role. And I think it's about I think in that way, we were able to get a lot of the things done. I think my involvement frequently in these conversations was kind of as president of Mishelanu and trying to bring the Israeli community's perspective into things. and kind of letting that bullet point shine. I think the best way to go is to just start involving yourself, whether that's, going and helping, just, putting out hostage posters, or really supporting any initiative that's already taking place. I think in that way you start forming the relationships with one another, and start learning about who's can do what role best and where each person can contribute. And I think that kind of links back to what we said earlier, is that everyone has a part to play, and everyone's contribution is just as important. And it doesn't have to be big things. It doesn't have to be you have to go and stand with an Israeli flag in front of a pro-Palestinian protest and put yourself in that danger. It can literally be just showing up at an event and listening to the speaker. It can be attending really anything to just support your community. And from there, you kind of become involved. Again, I think just putting yourself in that space, offering your help, seeing what people need, and offering, your own new ideas and new narratives.
Okay, thank you. See, we have okay. If there are no other questions, we'll thank you, Einav, thank you, Emmanuel, thank you, Milette. Thank you for the organizers, and thank you everybody for attending our webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.